Power does not corrupt, fear corrupts. Perhaps the fear of a loss of power. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today revolves around a few words that are close to the people's heart these days. Those are politics, governance, corruption, and the role of the judiciary. To talk about all this and more, we have invited four eminent personalities to the studios this evening as well. Let me quickly introduce them to you. Joining us this evening for the first time on Face the Nation is Malinda Senivaratna, a political commentator. Nice to have you on board, Malinda.
Glad to be here.
Joining us this evening is Dr. Pakisot Saranmuthu, Center for Policy Alternatives. He is the Executive Director. Nice to have you on the board.
Good evening.
Today, Dr. Saranmuthu. Also joining us this evening is Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, former Member of Parliament, after a lapse of a few months. Nice to have you back.
Good to be back.
On the show, Professor. All joining us this evening is Senior Attorney at Law, Mr. Govind Dayasri. Nice to have you on board, as always, Mr. Dayasri.
Thank you, and you are wearing the correct or incorrect color for your shirt today.
It's always about the color.
That's the topic.
There are no political affiliations whatsoever. Don't worry about that, Ms. Dayasri, because the color that you're wearing too is green, it seems to me, but you're very unbiased. So let's hear from the four of you shortly. So let's start off tonight's show with Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, former Member of Parliament. He was a nationalist MP of the United People's Freedom Alliance. So let's start off tonight's show with him. Professor Vijayasinghe, I recollect in 2014, you were among the few parliamentarians who walked out of the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime to support the candidature of Maithripala Sirisena. Since then, it's been 2.5 years or so. Are you satisfied the way in which this government has moved forward in terms of ensuring good governance in the country? The time starts now.
Not at all. I don't even understand what you mean by saying they moved in terms of good governance, because they've done nothing of the sort. The really sad thing is that there was a very carefully prepared manifesto by the President, and it made a lot of commitments to a lot of reforms, all of which, bar one, were completely ignored from day one. In fact, the question has just been raised at a meeting recently about the way Ranil Wickremesinghe thrust himself into the position of Prime Minister on the very day, contrary to the manifesto. The manifesto said President Maithripala Sirisena will be sworn in on the first day, and the next day a cabinet headed by Ranil Wickremesinghe would be appointed. And I still remember the morning when Ravi Karunayaka proposed that they be sworn in together. And I raised the point that, I thought this wouldn't be correct since there was no vacancy in the position. And Ranil, who, affects to be a little lethargic, suddenly rose up and said, there's nothing wrong with my being sworn in immediately. And I said, no, but you can't while they're the Prime Minister. And Ravi Karunayaka said, oh, well, we'll get Lalit Veerakoon to get the Mujaratna to resign. And that was promised. But we all know perfectly well that when Ranil took his oaths, there was already a Prime Minister. Now that set the stage for what was Ranil's vision of good governance, which is taking over the government himself. So that although the reduction in the powers of the presidency was promised, Ranil tried to abolish the presidency, and Jampati Vikramatne, wanted to put in the manifesto that the day after the election, the presidency would be abolished and powers transferred to the Prime Minister. And when I told him, A, this was morally wrong to ask to vote for A and then give B the power, and B, it was counterproductive because that was what Mahinda Rajapaksa was dreaming of, a contest against Ranil Wickremesinghe. Jampati came to me the next day and said, you were right, we'll do it later. So that was the sole ambition. So there was no electoral reform, there was no audit bill, the Freedom of Information Act was delayed unconscionably. There was absolutely no attempt to amend standing orders, and what has happened recently is a travesty. There is no accountability of the executive to parliamentary committees. There is no statutory requirement that the executive either follows the recommendations of committees like COPE and all that, We made it clear, we said not that you have to follow them, but you have to respond. And if you don't follow the recommendations, you must give reasons why not. There is nothing about making people answer questions in Parliament, so that every single one of the reforms that was pledged was completely forgotten. And when I kept reminding them of the need for all this, Karu Jasura, I remember, told me, yes, but my hands are tied, you know, he didn't rush me. Karu was meant to be Minister of Democratic Governance. So
Professor,
the point
you were part of this government as well. I recollect after the 8th of January, right after Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was appointed the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka at that time, on the 9th of January 2015. You were also part of this
I was part of
the
cabinet, but I was a state minister, again contrary to the promise, because the commitment was all
the commitment people made for you in terms of your position is not relevant, but you were part of this cabinet.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you remember, when I resigned from my position because of unwarranted interference by the cabinet minister, who had promised that he would not interfere at all. In fact, he told me, I don't have time because I have to fight the elections. He was then secretary and chairman of the party, Kabir Hashim. But when I resigned, I did not cross over, if you remember. I crossed over a month later, only when it became absolutely clear that the government was not only totally uninterested in structural reforms, but was also dishonest,
but
because
Professor,
it was the day of the bond scam.
You went ahead and then supported former President Mahinda Rajapaksa in his candidature prior to the 17th of August 2015.
The UPFA, which was led by Maithripala Sirisena, and it was Maithripala Sirisena who decided to give Mahinda Rajapaksa nomination. And if you remember, whenever you interviewed me, I said, to me the ideal is a government headed by Maithripala Sirisena, but with a SLFP-led government, because by then I knew that Ranil Wickremesinghe was not interested in reform. And
you were also in the national list of the UPFA.
I was at the
17th
time.
Of August.
But
all close confidants of President Maithripala Sirisena were appointed to the cabinet, or even as a member of parliament soon after.
No, I was told that Maithripala Sirisena had wanted me on the list, but after the election, apparently the two people who was forced not to appoint by Chandrika and Ranil acting together were in fact Shiral Laktilak and myself. Apparently they beseeched him not to appoint us. You can understand why, because we wanted the pledges Maithripala Sirisena had made. Shiral, I think, still works for Maithripala Sirisena, and Chandrika and Ranil were not interested in that. All they wanted was revenge on Mahinda Rajapaksa.
Very quickly, who do you work for now, Professor?
At the moment, I think if there were a general election, I would certainly vote for people opposed to the current UNP government.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, a former member of Parliament of the United People's Freedom Alliance, also the former leader of the Liberal Party of Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Dr. Pakeswar Saranmuthu, Executive Director of the Centre for Policy Alternatives. Dr. Saranmuthu, taking a look at the statement that Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe was mentioning and talking about how grim the situation is right now in the country, do you think so? We made some progress in a lot of respects. Certain pledges that were made on the 8th of January polls 2015 have already been fulfilled. Are you as pessimistic as Professor Vijayasinghe about the current state of affairs in Sri Lanka? Your time starts now.
No, I don't think I've ever been as pessimistic as Rajiv about anything, come to think of it. However, the point needs to be made that in terms of the promises and expectations raised in 2015, there is a lot that has not been done, and that there is a pervasive feeling amongst the public in general that the commitment to those promises, to those reforms, has been seriously diluted and even cast aside, and that there is a lack of direction, that at the end of the day what holds them together is a desire to cling on to power and not relinquish it to someone else. So I think as far as the government of the day is concerned, there is an absolute necessity for them to regroup, to ask themselves as to whether they're willing, able to recommit themselves to what happened, to what they've promised in 2015, at least come up with a minimum consensus and program of action for the rest of their term in office. Of course, there has been progress, in my opinion, in terms of the general political climate. We are not talking about white vans and all of that. We do have a right to information bill. We do have commitments that have been made in respect of transitional justice, but yet to be delivered upon. There is a constitutional assembly that is going on. We hope that the Sri Lanka Freedom Party will, as promised, present its proposals in the next couple of days, and that there will be an interim report presented to the country, and that the two main parties will tell us whether they're really serious with going ahead with this. I mean, so there are certain things that have happened, but there is still a lot to be done, and there is a crying need, I think, to impress upon and convince the public at large in this country that this government is willing and able to do so.
Dr. Saramutu, you said that the government has to regroup itself and move forward now. It's 2 years since the appointment of this government for the 17th of August 2017. 3 more years to go. Ample time or not enough time to do this? 3 more years only.
Well, whether it is ample or not, they certainly have to give it a shot. I mean, we do know that the agreement between the two parties lapses, I think, at the end of this month, which is just only a couple of days. So how do they proceed for the rest of the time, for the rest of their term? I think we need some certainty, we need some clear direction at this point.
Dr. Saramutu, you spoke on the 4th of August 2017 at a media briefing and said that Ravi Karunaika, the Foreign Affairs Minister, should resign from his portfolio, and never demanded an investigation into what exactly happened with regard to the bond scam that took place. My question is, does resignations alone address the problems at hand? We saw Vijayadasa Rajapaksa being thrown out of his portfolio.
Most certainly not. Most certainly not. Resignations may be necessary, but they are by no means sufficient. This is a process. If we are serious about governance, if we are serious about cleaning up government, there are a number of things to happen. One single act, there's no panacea, there is no magic wand. So in that respect, a lot has to happen. A lot has to be followed on with. And one point that I would like to impress, and that is this, is that you have the two main parties, or at least one part of one of the main parties of this country, in government together voluntarily for the first time. Their failure or inability, unwillingness to be able to deliver on promises and the expectations they raised is only going to bring into disrepute the institutions of representative democracy. That, I think, is the long-term consequence.
Dr. Saramutu, we see the resignation of Ravi Karunaika as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. However, during recent meetings that have been going on at Sirikota, Ravi Karunaika seems to be heading certain committees as well. We saw similar incidents taking place with Arjuna Mahendran. Even after he resigned as the governor of the central bank, he was still heading certain committees in question. Do you think this is a conflict of interest in terms of the way the people would look at things that are moving forward or taking place within the United National Party itself?
I certainly think that the commitment to governance will be taken a lot more seriously if one didn't have situations of this kind. I know the argument will be made that someone is always going to be innocent until proven guilty. But I think at the same time, the political consequences of what is happening is important, and indeed, one yearns for a time in which people will recognize the damage that they have done, advertently or inadvertently, and go, rather than wait to be pushed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parkesh Saramutu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. I now move my attention to Mr. Govind Dayasri, Senior Attorney at Law. Ms. Dayasri, the new constitution that is being discussed these days, do you think that Sri Lanka right now needs a new constitution? Do we need a 20th amendment to the constitution at this point of time? What are the priorities of Sri Lanka right now? Do you think we have got our priorities right? Your time starts now.
I feel that we have got the priorities all mixed up. For example, I think the 20th Amendment to the Constitution is necessary in a way that we have to change certain very important aspects. Namely, I think it's very important that the police powers should be retained with the central government. It's also necessary that electoral system should be changed, because that is the live wire for all this corruption that is taking place. The electorates are too big for the MPs, and they got to search for money before and after the elections. So I think there are certain amendments necessary, but I don't know whether those amendments are being taken into issue at all, so that we are bound to have the 21st and the 22nd constitutional amendments, and I think it's going to be a never-ending constitutional changes and that is in the making. Leaving that aside, I think the most important thing that has happened in the last 10 years has been the ending of the war successfully for the government. Because we as people, or in any kind of profession, business or vocation, would not have been able to live the lives that we lead today. Our children could not have lived safely. So I think the most important thing is the fact that we have been successfully able to eliminate terrorism comprehensively. But from that time onwards, I think the Mahinda Rajapaksa government made tremendous errors. Because the first thing they should have gone is for reconciliation process. Instead of that, they took on to a different line. I mean, the Northern Province development program, really I don't think there was any development for the Northern Province as such, except that you got structural development. But there was no people's development. That is very important. You got to think of the Northern people as people who have their own indigenous rights. Those things were not looked after, and that is a very important aspect that was neglected. Furthermore, the change of government. Now I heard my good friend Rajiv, a pessimist, and Dr. Sarunmuthu, an optimist, speaking for and against the government. I mean, I like the kind of things that Mr. Rajiv Vijayasinghe said, which is quite correct. I mean, I do say that he's the most lovable eye specialist I've seen or heard, because he talks so much about the events, anecdotal events that are interesting. But still, that is very valid for this reason. You see, today the government has been very unsuccessful because of very high expectations they held out. They have never been able to fulfill it, but certain things have been done. I would say the beginning and end of most of these things is the appointment of the three-man commission, which is bringing out a lot of dirt, filth that was uncovered, that was not discovered till those three great gentlemen were appointed. Now that all credit must go to Mr. Sirisena. And also the fact that he was the first who said that we do not need international judges to determine matters here. Now we have an excellent commission. Now could any international persons be associated in an event of that nature? No. So I think we are quite capable of doing it, and the President has taken the right step of not allowing Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe to bring his foreign nominees into our judicial system. That is not permitted in terms of our constitution. And furthermore, it has created, I think, the one major...
Mr. Ashley, you really can't point the finger at Ranil Wickremesinghe per se, because the head of the cabinet and the country's president was Maithripala Sirisena when they signed the joint communique, or the joint release that was issued at that time. And he has to take some sort of responsibility as well. And he exactly knew what was on that particular document in question, which was the US-sponsored resolution.
Quite so. But when he heard the public reaction to it, he changed his tone. He changed it. He said, I will not tolerate any foreign participation. He made it quite clear, and to his credit, you see, I think this government has done better in that aspect, because they have been able to negative the American intervention and the European intervention by the...
Actually, don't you think that this government has got entangled or trapped in their own statements? They spoke about good governance, they spoke about getting those who are corrupted arrested, and then they'll be held accountable. And then you see Ravi Karunayaka moving out, you see Upul Jayasuriya moving out, you see Maitri Gunratna moving out, you see the CBE chairman moving out, and then you have Vijayasinghe Rajapaksa moving out. And it seems that this government has got trapped in their own words.
You are quite right, but I don't think those individuals count. I think their departures may not be totally responsible for the
government ministers.
But the fact is that you're quite right, this government has got trapped, because the expectations they held out, they have never been able to. And I think Rajiv put it very well. They've never been able to reach that mark. And as a result, they have been very disappointing, but you have to give them credit. I think that today the judiciary is very much better.
Thank you very much.
I must say that Supreme Court is better.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ashley. We, of course, will talk a bit more on the judiciary, but a very quick question before I go to Malinder. You said that you like the statement that Rajiv made because he's a pessimist, and then you said you like the statement that Dr. Saramuthu made because he's an optimist. Who are you in agreement with now? Not both, I'm sure.
No, I wouldn't agree with either, but I would rather take a stand which is more realistic. But don't call me a realist.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dashri. I now move my attention to Malinder Senaratne, who is a political commentator. Malinder, looking at the present scenario, looking at the way in which this government has moved forward since the 8th of January 2015, are you satisfied the way in which this government has moved forward? Do you think they've stick to their priorities, they're doing it right? The only problem was the coalition government that came into play on the 17th of August.
Well, I think that Dr. Harshadisula put it best. He said that the entire system is corrupt and he's sick of it. And I applaud him for the courage to come out and say that as a member of this government. I'm confident that he will do the next take the next logical step of disassociating himself from the corrupt regime that he's unfortunately a part of. So, if you are talking in addition to the pessimism that Dr. Rajiv Vijay Singh expressed, he laid it out pretty clearly. But when you look at the past 2.5 years, 1 week after the presidential election, the president appoints his brother as the chairman of the SLT. Then we have the 100 days program, which the timetable was all wonky. They didn't stick to the schedule. Then we had the bond, central bank bond issue scam, which, as you mentioned. And the COPE report was essentially squashed by dissolving parliament. Then you have all the broken promises that were mentioned. So we have many reasons to be pessimistic about stuff. But now we've been hearing this over and over again. But we can't go back to the previous regime, right? Which is fine, right? Of course, you know. But if you are playing relative merits here, that is not what was expected. As Mr. Govindas said, that is, the expectations were very different. It was not about saying, well, we are corrupt. They were more corrupt. That is not what good governance is all about. When if you ask about the coherence of this government and the status of the coalition. As was pointed out, one person says one thing, there is agreement, then someone contradicts, then things are withdrawn. So there is confusion in within the government, and that is giving a very poor signal to everyone, the citizens, the international community, the investors. So that lack of confidence in government has been generated by the government itself. So the last 2.5 years are obviously disappointing. But there are positives which I agree with certain.
Now, Manas, you also a journalist and you also editor-in-chief of a newspaper. Compared to press freedom back then and now, there seems a very significant improvement, isn't it? One of the editor-in-chief, the newspaper that you represented, was assaulted. As a result of that, he's not even in the country at present. And things have improved. There's always a bit of pessimism when there's a government in action. However, you just can't blame the government in action again for everything that happens.
There is a greater sense of we feel that we have more breathing space. But if you're comparing governments, and we can also go back to the period towards the end of the 80s and the late 90s to see what kind of freedoms we had back then. And we must not forget that these are early days. I know for a fact that a senior member of this cabinet called an editor of a newspaper and said this particular column has to be removed, right? So there are.
And back then, if something of that sort happened, probably White Van came and was parked in opposite your office, and then you were.
There were many instances like that, not just White Van. I mean, assault.
I'm just give you a classic example. We did not see journalists being assaulted or murdered during this.
No, but we've seen university students being.
That happened during the previous regime as well.
Of course. So are we going back to saying this is okay? You're not as bad as that? Is that our consolation?
No, because I saw a recent statement made by the former president saying, During my time, there was never assaults that took place on.
No one will
on
ever take
university
credit
students.
for assault. They will always blame it on someone else. The things were not really rosy back then, but that does not mean we are having a beautiful time of it right now, right? We can always get better. Like certain positive things, the Right to Information Act, which it came late, but it did come. We have the 19th Amendment, which had the independent commissions, which corrected some of the flaws of the 17th Amendment and did away with the 18th Amendment. But we also must realize the 19th Amendment had clauses which allowed the government to go around its promises of limiting the cabinet size. So it has been a mixed bag, I think, right? And 2 years compared to 10 years of the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime and how that started going bad after 2010 especially, I don't think that we can be relaxed and happy and say things are better and therefore let's lay back and see how it's going to happen. I don't think that a responsible citizen should act like that.
Thank you very much, Malinda Senviratna, political commentator. Before I open the floor for questions from our journalist, a very quick question from you, because you mentioned a statement made by Dr. Harsha De Silva, and you said that it's nice to see individuals like that coming out and expressing their views, and you expect him to take the next step by disassociating himself from the government itself. But my question to you is a bit different. You have an individual who has been very vocal during the previous regime saying, you are corrupt, we need change, we have to move forward, who campaigned for good governance, and then this same individual comes back on a TV show and says it's a corrupt nation. And my question to him is, we all knew that, and that is why we appointed you all, and you all have not done anything about it.
Well, Harsha is not the most senior person in this government. Maybe he has done his best, but maybe he has not said enough. Maybe he can say now quite apart from disassociating himself from this government, when he says that the entire country is corrupt, the entire institutional arrangement is corrupt, all the politicians are corrupt, we expect him as a responsible citizen and a responsible representative to say, to disclose what is this corruption that he is talking about, who are the corrupt people that are implied in if there's corruption, there has to be some corrupt people. Maybe he will do that in the coming days. I certainly hope he will do so. Thank you very much,
Malinda, the political commentator. Let's hope for the best, and we can only, I can only say that only time will tell. So let me open the floor for questions. On to my immediate right is Chaturang Haporach, and on to my left today is two beautiful ladies, Sonali Vanik-Baduga and Charita Fernando. So let's start off with Sonali.
Thanks, Shamir. My first question is to Mr. Dayasri. We're looking forward to the local government elections finally, Mr. Dayasri. Now, recently the chairman of the Elections Commission, Mahinda Deshapriya, said there's a sharp decline in voter registrations among youth, among young adults and also low-income communities. How important is it for all relevant stakeholders to stress on the importance of the franchise, of the vote, and why do you think there is this trend now?
Yes, I think that's a very good observation you made, lady. But I think that one can certainly say this: don't have any expectations of anything of elections till the general elections or the presidential elections are held. This government is trying to ruse to postpone elections in not having elections. The matter has been taken up in court. It can be settled in court if the court is strong enough to say you have elections before or now before a particular date. That will conclude the matter, and I expect that to happen, the court to be firm and to give an issue of warning to all, to observe democracy, hold elections, don't postpone it till the last, just before the general elections, so that local government authorities can go on beyond their term. So I think that is the way to settle it. But I think the second part of your question is even more interesting, because I think the youth today have decided that it is not anything wrong with the SLFP or the UNP. What is wrong is with all politicians, whether they are liberal or whether they are communist or whether they are women's rights people or animals' rights, any kind of right. They are all bad once they get into parliament, because they get totally corrupt. Best of people get corrupt. I remember Jaya Jayawardena once said that I remember participating at a conference where he had with a delegation, and he said, well, you have to only give wine, women and song to these MPs, they'll go bad. And that is what went wrong, because if we had got even Prabhakaran and Vijay Veera into that parliament office, they would have been corrupt. So I don't think today you can say anybody is corrupt, and that is, I think we got to blame ourselves, because we have the right to elect. And why are we electing the same old codgers all over again? Aren't there young people? Where are the young people? Where have all the young men gone and women? You all are there. I mean, media is so active. But how many, when they get into the, you know people from your own radio networks who have got into politics. Can you call them thereafter, treat them with the same respect you had as media men? So conversion takes place. We must prevent that. And I'm glad that people like Rajiv has come out of it. I hope he doesn't get back to it. But let's hope that people come out of it and see their faults and rectify them. Because I think young people have a job to do in the future.
I think you need to respond to that question. I just want to correct Mr. Dashri there. You said that Professor Vijay Singh wanted out of the situation that was prevalent. Am I right?
But what I meant was he fortunately has come out of it. And he's in a position to rectify it, because he knows the inside workings.
If I say that you did not get that opportunity to be in the government and perform, would I be right?
Who, me?
Not you, Professor.
No, I mean, there are two issues.
Yeah.
One is, I have always believed that if you can't do a job, you should give up and go. So when I was made a state minister, I think, in fact, I was told that some people said that I was about the only person working in those first few months.
That's all the subjective statement.
Sorry?
That's a very subjective statement.
No, I was told. Okay. In fact, I was actually told that it was Malinda who had said something of the sort. He may deny this. It was told me by Udara. You can deny it. Udara Soisa told me that.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, he did.
You said that, Malinda. Okay, fine.
Thank you, Malinda. I have a good memory, and I always have evidence for what I said. This tells me neither Malinda was correct but he made it on a judgment, because I was working like hell.
Yeah.
And then when I was stopped from working, I went. But as I said very clearly, I did not cross over till the government to me had gone beyond the pale. And coincidentally, I crossed over the day Ranil Wickremesinghe made the outrageous statement, also attacking this TV network, about the bond scam, in which he said, no, nothing wrong happened. It is raised by MTV and Chiral Laktilaka. And we now know from all the evidence that has emerged how utterly involved he was in the absolute crookedness. So my point is, I left government, I think, at the right time. I crossed over at the right time. But certainly I was quite pleased when Maithripala Sirisena put me on the national list. I didn't see him before. After he put me on the list, I went and thanked him. I was with Faiza Mustafa, and Faiza said, you know, we are very low on the list. Should we be higher?
Professor, whatever statements you're making of individuals who are not here, I think you should take complete responsibility.
Have I ever failed to take responsibility
you have not, but it's
for
my duty
anything I have ever said?
It's my
and
duty
have I ever been proved wrong by you guys?
It's my duty.
Thank you, Malinda, because I really wasn't sure. I was only told this by Udara. Yeah. Anyway, and then Maithripala, who's actually a charming sense, said, you know, I thought you came here to thank
Professor,
me, not to complain.
I would appreciate the fact that you wouldn't mention the names of individuals who are not present here. You said Malinda, I was okay with it, because we can always justify it, and he can correct himself as well, and then point the finger at you.
I have told you guys that if you want to be mealy-mouthed, don't ask me. I always name names.
We're asking about your views, you're asking about your comments.
I'm telling you, I'm giving you evidence.
Yes.
You asked me a question. Yeah. I didn't bring this up. And then I pointed out that while I was pleased to be on the national list, I was sorry that I was not put into Parliament. Perhaps now I would be glad about it, because I think I would have found it very difficult had I been in Parliament to continue to serve with this government. And John Seneviratne, I think, is making the right sort of noise now about a UNP-dominated government. But I also think perhaps one reason why I should not feel upset about it is that I think Maithripala Sirisena, who made the choice to give Mahinda Rajapaksa nomination, and I don't think he did it hypocritically, suddenly changed horses in midstream. So he is now, in a sense, hoist with his own petard, because he has a parliament in which the UNP has larger numbers than the SLFP. And although I think he knows perfectly well that even within the UNP there's a demand for change. And, you know, not that Harsha will demand change. I think he is in a difficult position because you need a majority. So I think it's a tough job, and I think you're right, Gomin is right, I'm well out of it now.
Professor Vijay Singh, there seems to be a syndrome within the previous regime, the I can't remember syndrome, because you hear former President Mahinda Rajapaksa coming and saying about him not handing over the post of chairman to the Sri Lanka Freedom Party chairman right now, President Maithripala Sirisena, and you were part of this this group at that time.
No.
President Mahinda Rajapaksa
but far I can recollect, and I have not been for Mahinda Rajapaksa after the election handed over the party, and he said he had done it.
Yes.
This was in marked contrast to what happened in 2005 when Chandrika Kumaratunga didn't, if you remember, and Mahinda made that point. In return, Maithripala Sirisena, as you remember, although he had obviously taken the very forceful step of opposing Mahinda, gave Mahinda nomination for the parliamentary election. Now, once he'd done that, he should have stuck by that decision. I think he'd be a happier man now. I think the people around him panicked him. You know, he's in a difficult position, he worries, he's uncertain. And they told him that, you know, and I told Mahinda Rajapaksa, the people around you kept making threats, no wonder he got frightened. And I said, "Itinge taruna kattiyane," you know. But basically, Maithripala Sirisena panicked, and therefore he sacked, you know, secretaries, which he should never have done. And the result is a pervasive distrust at the moment on all sides. So it will be very difficult to, you know, build up this house again. But I still hope it will be done. And I think people like Johnson Ratna, who several months ago I said should be the general secretary of this party, could, I think, help to heal things and reach a modus vivendi between a very able, practical person. I think Mahinda Rajapaksa deserves credit. I kept saying it even when I opposed him for winning the war. And someone like Maithripala Sirisena, who has a gentler, more reconciliatory approach to life. And I think that sort of synthesis is what we should work
Dr. Saramuthu, 20th Amendment to the Constitution and the new Constitution that's coming into play. A lot of expressions are being made by political parties at different forums about a new constitution. Do we really need a new constitution at the moment in Sri Lanka at present, or can we do without it?
I personally would like to see a new constitution.
And why is that?
The reason why I say that is this, is that we've been through a war, we've been through the whole 10 years of the Rajapaksa regime. We need a blueprint, a supreme law of the land, which talks about the new Sri Lanka. The Sri Lanka which is committed to governance, in which there is a design and architecture that is committed to governance, which celebrates its diversity, its pluralism. It's a fresh beginning. We're embarking upon the 70th year of our independence. In 30 years' time, a lot of the people who have now refused to go and register or fail to register, they would presumably be in positions of responsibility in 30 years' time when this country celebrates 100 years of independence. We need to restore faith and confidence in democratic institutions in the future of this country, and a new constitution would give it that.
Dr. Saramuthu, the general notion right now in Sri Lanka is the fact that a new constitution is something that is being put to the hearts and minds of the government by the international community. And it is very evident the way in which the international community is also hell-bound to ensure that there's a new constitution in Sri Lanka. We see this coming from all corners of the Western world in particular. What do you have to say about this?
Well, I am
is it something that the people of Sri Lanka need? Because you are an individual who goes to the grassroots of the country.
I am completely unaware of the idea of a new constitution for this country being initially mooted by the international community from whichever part of the world. What I do know is, yes, the government of the day has talked about bringing a new constitution, and there are sections of the international community that have made encouraging noises, etc., with regard to it. But the idea of a new constitution, I don't think, came from outside. And in any event, even if we are not talking about a new constitution in toto, the issue of substantive, deep and meaningful reform to the existing architecture, particularly with regard to the executive, The abolition of the executive presidency, for heaven's sake, this has been around ever since the executive presidency was promulgated in 1978. Constitutional reform in this country is not a new thing in respect to the 1978 Constitution.
Mr. Dasri, I have a question for you.
Yes,
now, we saw President Sirisena quite unceremoniously removing the former Justice Minister, Vijayadasa Rajapaksa, but he remains in the Constitutional Council, and there is some difficulty in removing him from that position because there is no provision under the amendment. How do you see the situation, and do you think he should remain for his full 3-year term?
Well, I think this lawyer Rajapaksa is a very able man. I would consider him an intellectual in the legal sphere. But I cannot appreciate what he's doing now presently, changing parties at awkward times, especially when his party's fortunes are dimming. So I don't appreciate people who change parties, because I really respect Mahinda Rajapaksa and Ranil Wickremesinghe for only one thing. They have, whatever right or wrong, they have stood by their parties and carried them through more difficult times. But I find this Justice Minister shifting parties. And now yesterday I saw him very close to Mahinda Rajapaksa tying Pirit Nool at a temple ceremony. Now, all that may be true, but end of the day, what is this? What is the use of constitutions if the Supreme Court itself makes terrible mistakes? Now the main reason of the present constitution is that if a MP is thrown out by his party, he must be removed from the post of being an MP. That never happens after Sarath Silva, the Chief Justice's orders. At the time Sarath Silva was heading the judiciary, there were several Supreme Court orders which has negatived. Now last time we had another ruling on clause 774 of the Constitution, which says that you cannot have elections for 4 years and 6 months. Now several council made submissions in that case before the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court neither said yes or no. They didn't even give reasons. They didn't even consider a submission. So constitutions are of no value if courts and lawyers and Parliament can interpret it in a way that it is totally contrary to the intention of the Constitution or the words in the Constitution.
Dr. Sarnamatwa, I have a question for you. There is some speculation that the President may take over the Attorney General's department. What do you think of that move? Do you think it's aligned with good governance principles?
No, I don't think so. It was under the President in the previous regime. It was very welcome that it is not under the President, and it remains so. The important thing is that the Attorney General's department is not meddled with, interfered and influenced. That its independence, as far as I can see, the Attorney General's department should be very much like the Caesar's wife, completely above suspicion.
Can I make a point on
yes,
the AG's department? I think it's forgotten now that under the Salisbury Constitution, the post of Minister of Justice always went to someone who wasn't part of the electoral process.
Yeah,
he was
Senate.
supposed to be above. He was from the Senate. And indeed, in the latest proposals that I put, I was asked to chair a committee on proposals for good governance and better public service. The committee also thought that the commitment to have a limited cabinet was essential, and it has recommended on that there should be a couple of ministries that are not given to people subject to the electoral process. So this could be through nationalist MPs or whatever, because the Minister of Justice should be above party politics and electoral considerations, and the AG's department should go with that.
Mr. Senaratna, I want to ask a question from you regarding all these resignations. I think I'll come back to Professor Vijayasinghe as well. Are you the first, before I go there, are you the first state minister to have resigned from this government?
No, in fact, Faisal Mustafa beat me to it, but that was because he was not satisfied with the ministry.
Right. Mr. Senaratna, with all these resignations that we talk about, we saw today a news article where former Minister Ravi Karunanak has sent out a letter to all cabinet ministers, deputy ministers of the United National Party saying that he is now overlooking a project which comes under the ministry of the Prime Minister. We know that former Minister Vijayadasa Rajapaksa has given away all his ministerial vehicles, all his belongings of the ministry, and completely. We did not see this, however, with former Minister Ravi Karunanayake. We continue to see, as Shamir pointed out in the first round, like the former governor of the central bank, this former minister also receiving some form of support from the Prime Minister. What do you have to say about situations like this? Shouldn't he be a UNP MP now and wait for the process to finish?
Yeah, I think Dr. Saravanan answered that question. Just because you resign, that does not mean that's the end of the story. This is a man, we have to understand, he's under a cloud, right? So it is not in the government's interest to shift someone to another place, as though if he is corrupt or if there are serious allegations against him, or if someone is incompetent, you don't remove his one portfolio and give him another one. Now the letter that you are referring to, I think, is about rural infrastructure development or something like that, which also says that he has that news item, I think it appeared in Colombo Telegraph a few hours ago, where he has kept his perks. So this is not if you are talking about good governance, this looks pretty bad, lot like a lot of things that went with this government. So including one thing that was not mentioned was just before the general election 2 years ago, the leader of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party essentially froze the functioning of the party by sacking the Secretary General of the party and the Secretary General of the coalition led by the SLFP. Those are also things that we need to put on the table. So I don't think it's a good practice. We have seen that happening a lot, right? You have someone who is shifted from one place because of some allegation, and then all of a sudden he appears somewhere. It's like, these ghosts.
Is there a probation period, Mr. Seniratna, for all these?
There are no. I don't think. I think Mr. Dashri would answer that better. There are no. This is not illegal. We are not talking about Ranil Wickremesinghe doing something illegal.
But good governance is what they promised, and it doesn't look good, as you just now said.
I mean, if I'm accused of something that is really serious, that has cost the government and the people of this country billions of rupees.
Malinda, I have a question for you. What is the alternative? You seem to be very pessimistic about Sri Lanka's future at present.
No, I'm very optimistic. I'm optimistic because as the question was asked about the young people not registering to vote, that shows that the young people are sick of this system, like Harshali Silva.
Look, let's talk about the alternative.
The alternatives, if you're talking about alternatives, well,
not a slide back to what we experienced in the last 10 years.
I have announced that I will be a candidate at the 2020 election. So if you want an alternative, here I am. But if you want to go beyond that, we have to get rid of our fixation with these two major political parties and all the small parties that either held them into power or held them out of power. So nothing is cast in stone. I mean, it's not like we are going to, for the next 10 centuries, it's always going to be a UNP, SLFP or UNP, SLFP government in this country. I mean, there's nothing to say that has to be. So things can change. We saw in France that how Macron came to power. He was not a member of either of the major parties. We have seen major parties being rejected and outsiders coming in. So I think that's a trend which might be replicated in Sri Lanka very shortly.
Ms. Asher, do you agree with Malinda saying that alternative is not going to be from a main political party?
I'm very happy to hear that young people like Malinga have the courage to come forward at the 2020 elections. Malinga, I think, did even something greater which he didn't mention. I think he contested previously a very difficult area. The Jaffna, wasn't it, Malinga?
Yes, 2000.
So I think Malinga is a courageous young man, and if you have more young men like that coming forward, Sri Lanka will be a better place. Very short. May I say this? Don't blame SLFP, UNP, JVP, JHU. Blame all politicians. They have all ganged up together. For the last 20 years, it's the same politicians. You see Champika Ranawaka moving from one party to another. You can see Tondaman moving from one party to another. So it is all communities, all parties. It's a club. It's a club of the corrupt. Now we got to get young people, and young people have been denied that opportunity because of two people, I say primarily. Mahinda Rajapaksa and Ranil Wickremesinghe have outlasted themselves.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dashri. Before I go in for a short commercial break, a very quick question to Dr. Saramanamuthu. Dr. Saramanamuthu, Mangala Samaraweera confused the signals that went out as far as Sri Lanka's position internationally was. We saw how things were said and then said, no, we're not going to do it, in particular with regard to having international judges. Do you think Tilak Marapana can get the job done in terms of Geneva, September? Come September, we are again on the spotlight.
Well, I mean, we do know it's a matter of record that the government of Sri Lanka co-sponsored a resolution at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, which talks about international participation in terms of judges and prosecutors, etc., and that there are 2 years in which this is all supposed to happen. Now, since the government of Sri Lanka co-sponsored it, various members of the government of Sri Lanka have come out and put different interpretations on what that actually means. So the government clearly has to come out with one voice with regard to it. It seems like, in response to sections of public opinion, that they feel that there should be no foreign presence as far as any kind of court is concerned. They talked about a special court, a special counsel's office, and all of that. Now, I happen to be the secretary of a consultation task force on reconciliation, which went around the entire country, and we had submissions made on behalf of over 7,000 people. And this issue, of course, did come up. And not just in the north and east alone, but in other parts of the country too, the point was made that there should be internationals. And the argument was, look, we do not trust the judiciary of the country. That for the credibility of the exercise, if nothing else, this should be the case. Yeah? In some cases, in the north, we had people who turned around and said to us, there should be internationals only. And then when we talked with them more, they said, but there must be people, there must be judges who speak Tamil as well. And so we did make this recommendation about a hybrid in terms of a mixed court. Now the issue, I think, at hand is very simply this, is twofold. One is, are we going to move with regard to this accountability mechanism, this aspect of transitional justice, whether it be in the 2 years or beyond? And also, quite frankly, if we don't do anything in the 2 years, what is the international community going to do to us? I don't think very much, to be perfectly frank. I don't think very much. I don't think there's any stomach for another resolution on Sri Lanka. I think the United States may well have walked away, metaphorically, if not literally speaking, from the UN Human Rights Council under the Trump administration. And the United Kingdom might be mired in Brexit negotiations or lost its clout with the rest of Europe anyway.
So the government is doing the right thing, very strategically letting the issue die down completely.
I don't know whether it's the right thing. I don't know whether it's the right thing. But whatever it is they're doing, they may get away with it.
Professor Singh, very quickly, Dr. Saramanamuthu said that he has heard the submissions of 7,000 people, and majority of them says that intervention of international judges is a must. What are your thoughts?
No, I think when you select your sample group, you get the results you want.
Can I just intervene there? There was absolutely no selection of any sample group. Now, Professor Vijayasinghe says that he makes assertions, statements, etc., always with evidence.
Let me finish, you interrupted.
No, because that is such a bold, categorical statement that it does need a correction.
No.
People in these areas were asked to come and make submissions. No one went and told them to come and make submissions.
You call for volunteers. And I think when you have a group composed like the particular group that Dr. Saramanamuthu was secretary of, the vast majority of these people had no confidence in such a group. So therefore the people...
That's not fair to say, Professor.
Sorry? I'm sorry, I'm just saying what I think, and I think a lot of people whom I've spoken to, I mean, even after they delivered their report, said, but you know, here's Sara and his group. And don't forget, these are people who right through the war period kept attacking and using every single international trick they had in the book to prevent us triumphing over terrorism. And we know perfectly well, as Gomin said earlier, that this country is very relieved not to have terrorists. Now, those are many of us also.
This is going from absolutely ridiculous to suggest that I and friends or associates were using every trick in any book.
Sorry, I have
your news program. Get responsibility.
He's answering this, but let me tell you that I have written about this. In Geneva, there were occasions when they appeared and we were not invited. We would invite them to appear. Brindan Jadleka was head of our delegation. We wanted to have open debate. Sarah came. When I was head of the Peace Secretariat, I invited these people from these NGOs who were against the war effort. Jehan Pereira, to give him credit, always came and contributed. Dr. Saramuthu never bothered to come, and he would say, I selected the people I want. But when you ask for people to volunteer for support and assistance, sometimes people who have no confidence in you don't turn up. As I said, there were people like Sarah who never turned up. Jehan did turn up. And that is why I have continued to have respect for Jehan.
Professor,
but let me conclude.
Professor,
you said that Sarah said there was a majority of people in the country. I think it was a majority of people who had selected to go, and when you appoint a group like that without general representation of the country at large, I think you will expect that result.
But you can't expect Dr. Saranamuthu's team to go from door to door and ask people.
Let me make one clarification.
Yes, I'll get back to you.
The point that you made was a majority of people who, I beg your pardon?
Please,
I'll give an opportunity to Ms. Dasher.
A majority of people who responded to the issue with regard to accountability. We talked to them about accountability, truth and reconciliation, all of that did come up and say that, and that is why it was included in the recommendation.
Ms. Dasher, yes.
Well, let me say, people will say I'm biased, take a pro-Sinhala stand or a pro-Sri Lanka stand. Other people will say that Mr. Saranamuthu takes a pro-international stand or a pro-terrorist stand. Such people like me and Mr. Saramuthu should never be in those committees, should never be appointed, even if appointed, should know well not to accept it, because it colors the whole thing. I would say I should have been disqualified and I never participated in any such activity. Mr. Saramuthu, if he was decent enough, should have said, I'm a man with very strong views, so let me be out of it. He didn't. And that's why he's facing all this.
This is very peculiar. I've just been told that I wasn't decent enough to do something. I've just been told that I've employed every trick. What else? What's coming next?
Well, he has got two accusations that stand.
Who have you got here?
The discussion on this particular subject began about the confusion about Minister Mangala Samaravira saying something, right? I think this government is confused about a lot of things. Now, we were told that Ranil Wickremesinghe is an expert on economics and Mr. Clean and all that. A lot of things have been compromised since then. But at the time this government came to power, it placed all its best bets on the West, on Europe and North America, right? And then with Brexit, all of a sudden, the government says we are going to look east. Right? Now this is the same government. East is what? China, Japan. All this, China and Japan own the West's debt. We have to understand this is something that these economic experts have missed. Now if you want to, if you don't know where the bucks are going to come, who is going to bail you out, and you badmouth the big Mudalali, and you go to the Bulat Kade Mudalali to get the big loan that you want, what is your expertise on economics in the first place? Now that is the same kind of confusion that we see in this case. Now what Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe and Dr. Saranamuthu, this argument that we are having, I would not go to say that everything was tweaked and that there was a big kind of conspiracy. But I went and made submissions to the LLRC. Did Dr. Saranamuthu go to the LLRC?
No, I didn't go to it.
Yeah, so that is the point that I think they are making. We can't say that this. It's hard to point fingers and say, but there is an impression. Now, I wrote against when this committee was appointed. I wrote an article saying There's a problem with the composition.
At the end of the day, at the end of the day, it's not right to point the finger at just one individual, because everyone have the individuality at the end of the day, and what they want to achieve and their objective.
Right.
So
I pointed the finger at the entire committee. Yeah.
We can't here single out Dr. Saranamuthu and say you're this and you're that, because at the end of the day, he's doing what is right.
I'm not.
What he feels is right.
Exactly. I'm not saying that he. I said this. I said that I don't agree that. I don't believe that he was like calling up people and say, come and give evidence, right? I'm not saying that. And I don't think Dr. Vijay Singh is saying that. I'm saying
Dr. Vijay Singh suggested that, by the way.
No, what I said is that when you ask for volunteers, people will go depending on what they think you want to hear. You are Malinda and
that's not fair. When you said he selected the sample size, that's not.
No, I said that, and I was going to then explain that it was because it was voluntary submission. I was interrupted at the end of my first sentence, and I made the point later. Of course, I know they didn't go and select samples. Everyone knows.
So withdraw a statement.
No, but what I am saying is I was making a metaphorical statement about when you call for volunteers, the people who went to him were people who had this. But I want to make one point about Maithripala Sirisena's manifesto. Maithripala Sirisena's manifesto said two things that were totally ignored by the foreign minister. One is about not allowing foreign victimization of our people. He said that in the manifesto. The second thing...
But he also said in the manifesto that justice will be meted out to those who are affected by the war.
That is absolutely correct. And don't forget, I'm sorry, Shami, we're saying that, but justice meted out and having foreign people meting out justice are two separate things. And Maithripala Sirisena made it clear.
But the government went ahead.
The second point
is that
can I finish? Yeah. What Malinda said is also in his manifesto about China.
Professor, the point is they went ahead and signed a co-sponsored resolution.
No, exactly. The foreign minister signed this. As you know, the foreign minister stopped Ravinatha Aryasinghe, our representative who wanted to amend the American resolution. The foreign minister said this, and Maithripala Sirisena, I agree, he should have stopped it. But he wasn't experienced enough at the time. And I certainly say that he was gazumped. But on the other matter, it is also in his manifesto that he says our foreign policy should be based on a neighbours and Asian thing.
It's not
so what you said
Professor,
was exactly what Maithripala Sirisena said, and that was denied by the UNP government.
It's not individuals. The government should collectively take responsibility.
No, absolutely, and that is why people like Sarah can very rightly say government signed up to this. But government has every right to change its mind, and when what Mangala did was contrary to what the President in his manifesto had pledged, then I think government has every right to change things, and it should.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your thoughts in the first and the second round. We're going for a short commercial break. When we come back in the third round, we're talking about politics, governance, corruption, and the judiciary. Stay connected. Stay with Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. I start off the third round with Mr. Gomin Dayasri. Ms. Dayasri, the role of the judiciary right now, we see a lot of criticisms being levelled against the judiciary. We saw Deputy Minister Ranjan Ramanayake making a submission against the judiciary. Now the Bar Association of Sri Lanka wants to file an action against him on contempt of court, so on and so forth. The role of the judiciary in Sri Lanka, is it satisfactory? Now I know you're going to be very careful with your words.
I would say it is now satisfactory. It was not satisfactory. It was not satisfactory for a long time. You can't blame the government. You must blame some of the judges also. For example, we had two senior Supreme Court judges who became Chief Justices. I don't think either he or she were warranted a place there. So there were difficulties both on the side of the government, on the side of the judges, because I must give credit to this government on two things. One is, I don't quite agree with Malinda, though I'm very proud of him, but of many things he says, because I think this government has been able to I don't think it's cleverness or shrewdness, but they have been able to divert all that attention we were getting on war crimes away from the focus of the Western world. I mean, they trapped them with this amendment. I know it's dishonest to promise something and not keep to it, but it becomes necessary in national interest. And I think Sirisena did the right thing by diluting it when he realized what the public opinion is. Public opinion is not reflected by me or by Dr. Saranamuthu, though we say that is what the people think, 70% or 80% or whatever it is. That is poppycock. My view is that it can only happen at a general election. You know what the result is. or at an election where people are able to express their views. So that I think this government is today in a very serious position, not because of human rights, not because of good governance, but because of economic issues.
I want to pose a question to you, Mr. Dayasri. Do you remember the election pledges that the present regime made in the north and east?
Yes, I do.
Given the circumstances, don't you think that the government has a responsibility to ensure those who were involved in crimes whatsoever, whether it's crimes against humanity or war crimes or whatever it is, have to be held accountable for what happened?
They have to be accountable just as much as soldiers have to be accountable if they have committed war crimes. But now is that the time we have so many problems that this government has. I don't know whether there's any chance of a return of this government. That is why I'm very worried when people like Vijayadasa Rajapaksa starts moving at this critical time. Otherwise, I would have respected him more if he did stay with it, because it's only the rats who leave a sinking ship.
But are you trying to say that Vijayadasa Rajapaksa was an honest man?
I mean, I don't want to comment. I don't want to comment on honesty of people or integrity.
But I want to give you an example. The avant-garde incident that took place, Ms. Dayasri. We saw Vijayadasa Rajapaksa initially saying that he did not have any connection with Nisanga Senadipati, and then Field Marshal Saad Fonseca held a media briefing and then showed pictures of the two of them partying in Las Vegas and Disney World.
And he was also counsel for one of the parties. But then again, those are things I don't want to comment, because then, Shamir, we are making it very individual.
Absolutely, but when you say that you didn't like the fact that individuals like Vijayadasa Rajapaksa was moving out, it doesn't mix. It contradicts your statement itself.
No, in the sense that's a political decision. I don't want to get in all these personal decisions of whether he wants to. I mean, at a certain time when the government.
I want to drag your attention to the statement that was made by Dr. Rajasen Ratna at the cabinet media briefing. He said that when people are leaving or when people are being removed, everyone should be happy that there is good governance. Isn't that the case?
But if you look at it, Tilak Maharapan was removed because he had made certain concessions to avant-garde. But he was restored. He resigned, but he was restored in greater glory. So is Ravi Karunanayake. He says, I resigned it honor. I mean, today restoration back into office.
Maybe Vijayadasa Rajapaksa will also hold a bigger office when he comes back again.
I would say even Ravi Karunanayake might make a comeback.
Thank you very much.
So I think today this is one club, and that club is a dishonest club. We have to get rid of those members first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gomin Dayasri. Now move my attention to Malinder Senivaratna, a political commentator. Malinder, interesting thoughts indeed. I want to drag your attention to the current state of affairs in Sri Lanka at present, politics. Is this becoming a word that the youth of Sri Lanka do not want to hear anymore? Is this becoming a word that everyone is disgusted with? The time starts now.
The short answer is yes, but to quickly respond to what Dr. Mr. Dayasri said, yes, the climate is better now in terms of how the international community views us. Whether that credit should go to the government or because it's a government that they wanted as opposed to the government that was. They were fighting for regime change. And I'll just finish very quickly. Because Dr. Sarumantu said that they are making some noises and they are encouraging noises, but when you read the statements made by the US Secretary of State and those officials, it's not encouragement. It's almost like a demand. So let's be happy that we are off their radar or whatever because there's Trump or so on. But the question about politics and being a dirty word, yes, this is what Mr. Dayasri says is absolutely correct. This is a club of corrupt people. We have to get rid of this entire club, and I don't blame young people for not wanting politicians. If you want to put it in Sinhala, Deshapalakaya epa. Apite minissu one. There was an editorial in the Island that the cricket, a gentleman's game, it's in this situation because there are no gentlemen in it. We don't have gentlemen in politics. We don't have gentlemen, ladies, whatever you want to call. But the issue is that we don't have good people governing us. the entire system is corrupt, as Dr. Harsha said. So therefore there is this utter lack of faith, lack of confidence about politicians and political parties. So we have to move away from them.
Malinda, very quickly, you said that the international community played a role, somewhat of a role, by appointing this government in play, and that is why we are off the radar somewhat. But the international community did not vote in Sri Lanka. It was the people who went out there and voted. 6.2 million people who voted in favor of the
We know how in 1994 we signed to the WTO Act when the UNCTAD was when the GATT ended. There were the green rooms. There's arm twisting. We know all this. It's not official. It's not official. But there are things that happen. So Dr. Sarma is correct. Whether the international community wants it or not, that's a different matter. But we need justice. We need justice, and that's a people's demand.
Thank you very
and
much.
if you have issues with the justice system, that is our problem. And I'm in total agreement with Dr. Ms. Dasi that we have to do this. It's the people who have to do this.
Thank you very much, Malinda, for your thoughts. It's what the people want at the end of the day. I now move my attention to Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, former Member of Parliament. Mr. Vijayasinghe, I want to talk about governance with you. You were very bold at one point to walk out of the government. I still recollect that speech that you made, took your gear and walked out and sat on the opposite direction of the parliament, and you were quite happy with it. And then 1 month after Ranil Wickremesinghe made that speech, you again said that you are sitting independent. Correct me if I'm wrong on this.
No. I resigned from my ministry in February. I crossed over in March.
In March, that's right.
That was because it was clear how badly the government was performing.
Good government.
Coincidentally, the whole bond issue broke at that time. And I think that liberated me to actually look at the bond issue, get expert opinion. You know, I spoke to Dr. Vijayawardena, got all his views on it. And then it became crystal clear to me that massive crookedness had happened. You know, I'm very pleased that Champika Ranawalekar now has recognized this. And Champika in May did it, but then he got trapped. So it's a pity that people who, you know, now realize how terrible the bond issue was, did not make this same type of statement in 2015, because it would have strengthened Maithripala Sirisena's hand to get rid of Arjuna Mahendran. As it is, Arjuna Mahendran continued for another year, and there was a second bond scam.
Professor, you know. I want to drag your attention to one of the individuals who was the governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka during your tenure in office, Ajit Niwad Kabra. You saw a statement that he made saying that he's ready to speak before the Bond Commission and give his evidence because he has done a calculation as to what went wrong. But he failed to appear at the COPE committee, according to Dr. Harsha De Silva, in 2011, 2012 and 2013, when he was requested to appear before the COPE committee.
It's rubbish. I have been on COPE when Niwad Kabral appeared.
And which year was this?
I can't remember. When I was on COPE, and you're probably aware that I was perhaps, along with New Gunasekara, one of the chief members of COPE, and indeed set up the review committee on that. Kabral has been there. Kabral appeared all the time. He answered questions. With regard to this bond scam also, he provided written evidence. We didn't summon him. It's rubbish to say Kabral didn't appear. And one of the horrible things, and I'm sorry that Harsha is doing this, because Harsha is a man of greater integrity than Ranil. You see, Ranil, if you remember in that speech in March 2015.
You were a member of COPE in which years?
From 2010 to 2015.
So Dr. Harsha De Silva mentions 2011, 2012.
Harsha De Silva was not on COPE. Harsha De Silva was not on COPE in those days. He was in the PAC. Niwad Kabral, I have a memory that he appeared once, I don't know how often he came. To say he refused to appear is absolute rubbish. People cannot refuse to appear. But the second thing is Ranil tried to do a really nasty thing by A, attacking Niwad, B, by making his own committee of lawyers whom he tried to get to whitewash Mahendran. He actually gave them a mandate to look into what Kabral did wrong. They could find nothing. Now they are claiming that Kabral gave bonds to perpetual treasuries. Kabral sent us the whole list of the bonds perpetual treasuries got before 2015. It was a negligible amount, but their portfolio went up massively from the moment Mahendran took over. And as you know, Arjun
But
Aloysius
you know that
resigned on January 16th, getting ready for this scam, so it was actually well planned. So I think the attacks on Cabral are entirely unfair. And one final thing, I've now written about it. You see, Iran Vikramaratne made criticisms of Cabral's treatment of bonds because Iran didn't like what he called direct placements. He said this meant, because Cabral got low interest rates for Sri Lanka. And Iran said Cabral was making people like EPF get bonds at low interest rates. In fact, Cabral gave options to all the primary dealers. None of them complained when we summoned them that they had been deprived, but they got it at low interest. Now what has happened is Iran, who then spoke in favor of the EPF saying Cabral has made it low, now that it is clear that one of the things that Arjuna and Mahendran and Aloysius and Ranil Wickremesinghe was buy cheap at very low rates and then flog it to the EPF at higher rates, exploiting the EPF. I think Iran, like Harsha, wants to resign about this issue. It's a very important issue, Shamir.
I'll get back to you.
Just a short objection. I think Mr. Rajiv Vijay Singh is making certain valuable contributions, but he says he relies on evidence, but this is not evidence, this is hearsay evidence.
Hearsay, absolutely.
And that is hearsay, Rajiv.
What was hearsay?
I can't.
No, tell me the fact, because I'm reporting what happened in reporting what happened in COPE. You made an allegation that Harsha said.
It's very wrong.
I'm also saying it's on record. No, Iran in good faith actually made this point. I'm sorry, this point was made about the EPF having to take bonds at low rate.
Very quick question.
Now that the Commission has proved that the EPF was exploited by this lot. And I think Iran should recognize.
You're well aware that Ajit Nivar Cabral's sister was in the Perpetual Treasuries Board. Are you aware?
I know that.
And then you say that a meager amount of money was the gain that Perpetual Treasuries got at that time.
Not a gain. They got one bond issue, I think it may have been two, at the interest rate that everyone else got.
But do you agree with
what
me?
happened in February 2015
let's talk about
they got, I'm sorry, this is very important and the country has been exploited.
People are aware about what happened in the bond scam.
At an interest rate of massive interest rate
compared with everyone else. People are aware as to what happened with regard to the bond scam that took place in February. People are aware of what happened in the 2016 April bond scam as well. People know exactly what happened, and that is why the Commission is now sitting.
But then you ask me a question about Nivad and that, which is rubbish. If people are aware, they should be aware of that.
My question is very simple to you, Professor Jayasinghe. You are saying that a small amount of money was the gain of Perpetual Treasuries.
Not the gain. I am talking of the fact that Perpetual bond portfolios, Perpetual Treasuries, I think, made one bid which was successful,
which was one bid?
Low interest rate, like everybody else.
Okay, but
the problem was in 2015 when other people actually paid for bonds at over par. They got it for 75.
Very simple.
So come on,
people's money. It's people's money at the end of the day. It's people's money at the end of the day. It's very simple, Professor Jayasinghe. People's money at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So there is no conflict of interest then. The governor of the central bank's sister is sitting at the board of the Perpetual Treasuries board, the main board. That's not a conflict of interest.
That is not a conflict of interest.
I think this is a waste of time. This is a waste of time. That is not a conflict of interest. You might say so. That is your
I take your point, Professor Jayasinghe.
Please, we'll get on to something else.
Thank you very much, Professor.
But you
I want to move my attention to Dr. Parker Saranmuthu, the Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. Dr. Saranmuthu, the option, the alternative that we have right now is not to slide back to what we experienced before. We need to move forward. Do you think that this government has the muscle to ensure that we move forward as a nation, as a country, 3 years from now?
Well, I think there is a huge responsibility on the part of those who voted for this government in 2015, in the presidential as well as in the general elections, to tell them in no uncertain terms to get their act together. Otherwise we are going to go back to the future, which is extremely unpleasant and quite horrifying, quite frankly. So they have to at least come to a minimum consensus in terms of what they can together do. And yes, there will be differences on certain issues, and they may well be going their different ways at some point in the not too distant future. But they have a term of office to complete. You can't have this kind of incoherence and instability. They need to tell us what it is that they're going to do. One of the biggest problems, I think, with this government is that it doesn't communicate to the people at large. It's either unwilling or unable to do that. And I think it's tremendously important that they do. And finally, I mean, I've re-emphasized this point, that it is tremendously important that they do get their act together, because it is the corrosion of the institutions of democracy in this country, the public perception that all politicians are corrupt, that, as someone here said, it's a corrupt club, etc., that is not healthy for the future of government and governance into the future.
But, Dr. Saramathu, do you agree if I say that this government has a lot in their plate right now? Not just one issue alone. There is reconciliation issues, there is corruption issues, there is good governance issues, and then there seems to be a political crisis within the two main political parties as well.
Well, what's on their plate right now, they knew when they were standing for election. If there is a crisis, if there has been a compounding of the problem, they themselves must take a certain amount, a considerable amount, in my opinion, responsibility for it. And you can't be in government and turn around and say that the responsibility is overwhelming us. Then go.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pakis Saramathu. I open the floor for questions from our journalists, but before that, very quickly, we hear statements that are being made by the former governor of the central bank with regard to the present bond scam that is going on. However, I wish the former governor of the central bank, Ajit Nivad Kabras, makes a calculation as to how much money Sri Lanka lost with regard to the Greek bonds. A lot of money with regard to EPF, and that is your money. That's the people's money at the end of the day. With regard to the Commonwealth Games pending that took place in Sri Lanka, to make Hambantota as the hub for the Commonwealth sports in the country, in the region. Where is that money? There are many issues. Unfortunately, this government seems to not have the will to ensure that those who were corrupt in the previous regime are brought before the law, are brought before book. So that is what it is at the moment. So I open the floor for questions. Yes, Sarita, let's start off from you.
Malinda, I have a question for you. Right now, we see a lot of uncertainty, disillusionment, and lack of direction in the government. And we also hear that in early September, the government is planning to unveil a new development plan. So we've heard of strategies, plans, chintanas, so many things before. In this climate, do you think the public can pin any hopes on a new development plan in the current context?
Well, if you take the track record, of course, there's nothing much to, I mean, I'm not going to bet on anything coherent coming out of this government. As Dr. Saramathu said, you can't turn around and say we didn't anticipate all that. That is not why people voted it. And I don't think that asking them to go or getting rid of them necessarily means we are going back to the future. As he said, we could go to the future if we think of all these things in different kind of way. There are all kinds of crises that's before them in terms of the whole coalition and the integrity of the coalition, given all the corruption, the nepotism, and not good governance, but there's lack of governance. I mean, forget the good part of it. There seems to be that lack of direction, lack of understanding about it. So and then you get this perception that, I mean, you can't blame people for thinking that these people know that they are going to lose the next election. So some people are making bucks as much as they can while they are in power. So, of course, if there is some proper plan of development which will have some benefit to the people, long term, short term, it doesn't matter, I would welcome that, and I would expect any government in power to come up with a proper statement and deliver on it. But the track record of the last 2.5 years does not make me very optimistic.
Dr. Saranamuthu, let's talk a bit about the reformation of state institutions in Sri Lanka. If one were to say that we are a bribe-taking, bribe-giving nation depending on a disincentivized, poorly trained state sector at especially low and middle levels, would you be inclined to agree?
No, one thing I want to say is this, is that I don't think that the state sector is dishonest and corrupt. I think if the state sector is allowed to function as they are supposed to, without the political interference, you will find that there are well-qualified people there with expertise and experience who will be able to administer the country efficiently. I think what we've got here is this patronage politics and the politicization of the bureaucracy, of the state sector, etc., which is the cancer that is eating away at it. Now, at the end of the day, I don't think one can blame politicians alone. There is a responsibility on the part of civil society and the part of all of us as citizens in this country to break that kind of culture, to break that culture. You know, and we should indeed ask ourselves. I think Harsha on some celebrated occasion did turn around and ask people how many of them had given bribes or whatever it is. Maybe that may not be exactly the way of going about it, but there has to be a recognition on the part of this society that politicians are not a breed apart. They didn't drop from the skies or turn up from under a stone. They're us.
Right, thank you very much. Malinda, we spoke a lot about disillusionment of leadership. Just to give you some stats, Canada's Prime Minister is 45 years old, France's President is 39, North Korea's leader is 33. For the benefit of our viewers, how old are you?
How old do you think I am?
In your 40s, I'm guessing.
No, I'm 52.
But young enough to be president, you're saying?
I am 52. But I mean, it's not about me. It's about someone. We are looking for someone who is not affiliated, who is not clinging on to these two parties. Mr. Nagananda Kodituakku, who is a public interest litigant, I think he is a good candidate. He's, I think, much older than me. I think probably in his 60s. And it's not about the age. Let us not be ageist. The correct candidate could be 35.
But you're saying that we need young leadership, we need to see beyond political party lines?
Yeah, I'm not saying we need young leadership. I am saying that we need a different kind of leadership. I'm saying that we need to have a leadership that looks to the future, that is concerned about a sustainable Sri Lanka, which cares about our children, which cares about our forests, which cares about our water, which cares about our culture and our history, has a sense of our history, and based on that, how we should have some idea about where we should take this country and leave it for the generations to come. The age is not a factor in that.
So what's wrong with the existing politicians?
We talked about it for the last 1.5 years.
Yeah, but you're saying it's not about age.
Yes.
So what is it about?
Well, we take this parliament, there are people as young as 30 and maybe even younger, and there are people, I think, who are over 70 and close to 80.
Sure.
So the issue here is the political culture that these people did their politics in, and the institutions that enable them to be the corrupt, nepotistic politicians that they are. So Dr. Saranamuthu is right. It's not about the politicians only. It's about people. It's about changing the structures we generate, like the presidential, like the executive president. It is not that Mahinda Rajapaksa was a dictator or Chandrika Kumaratunga was a dictator, but it's a constitution that is made to make dictators. If I am the president tomorrow under this constitution, given the powers that I have, I am a dictator. So
when Sonali said that she assumed that you were in the 40s, I thought you will say a thank you and then say you're 52, but didn't see that.
Well, 50 means I'm more mature. I have more life experience. You know.
But I thought that at least be a thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shamir, for pointing that out.
Greatly appreciate.
Dr. Saranamuthu, I want to ask a question from you regarding the local government elections. Now, we see that there was definitely a delay of holding these elections that the people are supposed to exercise, but then we saw the government or people in the government coming out and saying, look, we need to look at having the elections on the same day. Now, we have seen the passage of the Local Government Amendments Act in Parliament. There were only abstentions and no one voted in objection of the passage of it. Is this also a delaying tactic, this fact that they want to hold it on the same day? Or is this a good thing for the country?
Well, I mean, I don't have sort of principled objections as such to the idea of holding it on one day. But the way in which it is being done at the present moment certainly, to me, lends credence to the argument that all of this is being done to delay the inevitable contest and meeting of the electorate, you know. And so it seems to be that the impression that is created is of the government running scared of facing the electorate. And I think, personally, I think this is politically also unwise. If there is a whole lot of frustration and disillusionment building up, provide the opportunity for the electorate to let off that steam rather than have it all at one point. But there's one other thing that I want to say, and I think this is very important. If we are committed to devolution, for example, and this pertains to the provincial council elections, this situation in which the central government will be deciding on when the election should be, and in the meantime taking over the powers of provincial councils, totally undermines that. So if there is some sort of political expediency that leads to this 20th Amendment, my plea, I strongly urge, that one looks again at it in the totality of the constitutional reform that we want in this country, and that indeed we have in this country already, because we do have provincial councils.
But to add more to that point, the government did not speak about having the elections on the same day before this came to this level where we are at right now.
Yeah, there's no escaping the fact that these things have been brought up to delay, to postpone that inevitable electoral contest.
Malinda, I want to ask you a question. Now, Dr. Pakisud Saranmuthu says that the government is scared to go to the electorate level and face the people, basically. We know that there are two factions, SLFP, UNP. Who is scared? What is this fear?
Well, generally, if you look at the voting patterns over the last 30 years, whenever a new government comes in, they've had the local government election and they've swept it. Now, 2.5 years, given what has happened and the disillusionment which has been expressed here, then obviously the government is scared. They're not going to sweep. And if we have a situation where the SLFP split between the Maitripala faction and the Mahinda Rajapaksa faction, if you have local government elections, the majority will obviously, I mean, the arithmetic will say it should go to the UNP. But there may be cases where the joint opposition might win in certain local government bodies, and maybe Maitripala's faction could come forth. The JVP makes some moves. So I don't know, everyone's politicians like to be in power and stay in power as long as they can. Right now, those who are not in power, they are sensing blood. And so they will make go at it, and obviously the government in power is scared of the fears that Dr. Saranmuthu talked about.
Am I right in saying that the UNP in the government or the SLFP in the government are scared of the other party, the other faction, the UNP or the SLFP gaining more votes rather than being, in the defeating side of things?
We saw that they had a kind of an arrangement in August 2015. Whether they can replicate that, we don't know. We don't know what kind of discussions are taking place. But yes, that is also a fear that has, another element of fear that has come into the equation.
Dr. Saranmuthu, now when the Act is passed in Parliament, we heard opinions being raised that the elections has to be held within 4 weeks after the Speaker puts a signature and passes it as a law. Now, with all these developments that are happening in the country, now when will the elections be held? Do we have a date speculation?
I think with regard to local government, the Commission or the Commission of Elections has made the point that if it is sent to them fairly soon, it can be held before examinations and all of that kick in. So it is up to the government now to demonstrate its commitment in terms of wanting to hold this.
Delays the piece of document going from the Speaker's office to wherever it needs to go.
Yeah.
That is where...
Yeah, he's on record saying that if it is given to him within the specified period of time, he can go ahead and hold them before, I think he said, the 17th of December.
Dr. Rajiv Vijay Singha, speaking of education reforms, there's a pilot program to implement mandatory education for 13 years, which is scheduled to commence next month. The government has identified 42 schools across the island, national schools. My questions to you are multi-pronged. One, is our youth job ready? Two, does our current education system provide for holistic, well-rounded individuals to come out of the education system? Or are we creating a culture where individuals, after they pass maybe their O-levels or fail their O-levels, the majority, especially out of Colombo, out of cities, when you go closer to the villages, either take up like a three-wheeler driver job or something like that, or get into drugs and other social vices. Where is our education system right now, since you are an expert in this field?
Before I answer that question, I like to say how very sorry I am that this program is attacking Nivad Cabral and following the UNP line on this. And in fact, I'm grateful that you mentioned the Greek bonds, because in fact, now I recall that it was precisely with regard to the Greek bonds that Cabral appeared before COPE. COPE questioned him at length about this. The UNP members were also there. And in the end, we reached the conclusion that though there had been misjudgment, we also looked at the portfolio as a whole. You see, when...
And what was the outcome like?
It was actually very successful in terms of the...
How did we lose money?
Sorry?
How did Sri Lanka lose money then?
No, because they actually went for Greek bonds, the value of which was going down. So they made a misjudgment. But
who made misjudgment?
The central bank dealers who made the decision.
Isn't it the public's money at the end of the day?
Can I finish?
No, but isn't that the public's money at the end of the day?
Of course it is. But when you allow people... No, Shami, the simple fact is when you give the central bank the right to make speculative bids and so on, they make profits in some areas and they lose on others. Now, it is actually unfair to say, okay, you are bloody idiots or whatever with regard to the Greek bonds, but the fact that you actually made a lot of money on other bonds where your guessers or whatever were more fortunate.
Example?
I can't remember the exact portfolio, but the figures for that year and the figures for every year show that the reserves went up. So this was the particular year. We quizzed them at length. So
reserves went up because of the bond sale, or reserves went up because of the...
Shamir, because the investments that government made, some of them lost money, but more gained money. So when you have a situation like that, the final record, and that is why our rating was actually quite high at that stage, because the central bank was generally making the right guesses, although they made wrong ones. So to me, what is rather sad is you are perpetuating this, the red herring about the appalling, unquestionable corruption and loss of what happened with the central bank bonds in 2015 and 2016. There is an attempt by the UNP to actually draw red herrings by referring to two things. One is this idea about, perpetual treasuries also benefited under Cabral. They didn't compared with anyone else.
You said that there was no conflict of interest even though Cabral's sister was in the board.
Yes, because if you look at the way conflicts of interest are actually stated in strict parlance, sisters have an independent existence. It's not like the wife who lives in a house where she paid money and didn't tell the husband. You see, conflict of interest in direct dependence. Yeah. But the simple point is this, that there, in the old days there used to be people who said both the LTT, the terrorists, and the Sri Lankan government committed war crimes and put them on a par. And we used to always find it very, very bad if you read a lot of these reports. Of course, we acknowledge that things went wrong. The LLRC said there should be investigations. The Commission, Paranagama inquiry, also made points, and some of us kept telling Mahinda Rajapaksa, you must act on these. Right? But at no stage did we think it was correct to equate the LTT and the Sri Lankan government in terms of the suffering of human individuals. Similarly, there is an attempt to draw a red herring, and I am ashamed that Sirasa should be perpetuating this myth. I'm sorry that Harsha should have said something.
I respect your
and I'm also sorry that Harsha, whom I'm very fond of, should have said this, because I know that Cabral appeared. I had forgotten the particular instance, but when you said Greek bonds, I remember us quizzing him at length. So I think what
the Greek
happened
bond
then...
was a separate incident. I said, why wasn't a proper calculation done by the former governor of the central bank with regard to the loss that the country made from the Greek bond?
No, that was calculated and shown us, because don't forget, the figure that was paid and then what they had to sell at was the loss. Similarly, the figure paid for other bonds on which they made profits and therefore sold them at profit margins led in the end to the, as it were, the profit and loss that account here being positive. So as I said, you have to look at the whole. Misjudgments are made, right?
Misjudgments are made when the auction with regard to the Greek bonds are sliding. You go and make an investment there, is it?
No, because the assumption
is that it will go up.
It will go up again, and that was wrong. Yeah. But then on other matters, it did go up.
Right, thank you very much.
No, but the point I was trying to make is to equate that with what we know, and every day that passes show the deliberate planning that went into plundering Sri Lanka. With regard to education questions...
No, I need to stop now, Professor Singh. I need to pose a question
I'm sorry,
to
I couldn't answer the question, but that's a long list.
Unfortunately, you couldn't answer that question, but my point is very simple. So you have a particular bond that is making losses, and then you think, okay, it's okay to go ahead because it's a people's money at the end of the day. So what? We lose some money. It's the people's money, it's people's EPF money. Whoever did wrong is wrong. That's what it is. Whether it's a sister who is in the board of a particular company, that's conflict of interest. If it's a son-in-law who is doing it, that's conflict of interest. You know, based on the law, conflict of interest derives from the family members and also those who are connected to that immediate family.
On the board, he resigned. He resigned 2 days before precisely to say there's no conflict of interest.
Whatever it is, Professor, I'm posing this question to Ms. Dayasri. So all this.
The conflict of interest is a very wide term. I mean, wherever interest very hinges on an individual or in a group or in an association, you can't have a conflict of interest. Now I remember very well, we had the case of the war crimes, and we found the Center for Policy Alternative having as the counsel for the prosecution Raja Gunasekara, who happened to be the chairman of the CPA at one stage, and Dr. Nesaya was a member of the CPA. So finally they had to leave. So this kind of situation does happen, and then people do the honorable thing of leaving. I think today the most important point today to me is the point made by Charita. That is that young people, why are they not coming into politics? Young people have no place today. Because all places have been accommodated by the relations or chums or friends or wives of the politicians. It's a one club, and that is why Charita's point is very valid. That we didn't emphasize it enough. Young people are staying away from politics. Politics have become a dirty game. So I'm very happy that people like Malinga are coming into politics.
Thank you very much.
All of you people are young enough to take an interest
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your thoughts. Before I move to a short commercial break, while respecting the views of those who are making submissions today in the panel, something has to be made very clear. Corruption is corruption whichever government commits. We saw corruption taking place in the previous regime, and that is why you went ahead and voted against the regime. And then this government came into play, there is corruption again. Whether it's done by this government or even the previous government, what is important to understand is those who are corrupt should be brought before the law. It's your money that they're swindling with. It's your money, your hard-earned money, what you contribute from your salaries that go to the EPF and the ETF at the end of the day. You should know what is exactly happening. Conflict of interest at the end of the day, you know best. We're going for a short commercial break. Stay connected. Stay with Face the Nation.
Thank you.